whose idealism was exploited during the madness of the Cultural Revolution, and whose values have been tested by the booming economy and the rush to get rich. The young men and women who filled Tiananmen Square in the spring of 1989 saw their hopes for a democratic China crushed in a massacre. But as older, more pragmatic adults, many continue to pursue political change in different ways. In the 3 decades since Mao Zedong's death, China has undergone a dizzying transformation. A backwater economy has become a powerhouse of manufacturing and trade, with growth rates that are the envy of the world. Skyscrapers have sprouted from rice paddies, gleaming cities from fishing villages. Infant mortality is down, and incomes and life expectancy are up. With economic change has come political progress, too. The terror campaigns that Mao favored, the mass denunciation meetings, the frenzied crowds of youngsters waving little red books, they are all things of the past. People enjoy greater prosperity, but also greater personal freedom and access to information than ever before under communist rule. By almost any measure, the country's last 25 years have been the best in its 5,000-year history. But the Chinese people have not yet escaped Mao's shadow. A momentous struggle is underway for the soul of the world's most populous nation. On one side is the venal party state, an entrenched elite fighting to preserve the country's authoritarian political system and its privileged place within it. On the other is a ragtag collection of lawyers, journalists, entrepreneurs, artists, hustlers, and dreamers striving to build a more tolerant, open, and democratic China. The outcome of this struggle is important not only because half of the planet's population without basic political freedoms lives in China, or because other governments around the world are already copying the Chinese model to curb demands for democratic change by their own peoples. It is also important because what kind of country China becomes, democracy, dictatorship, or something in between, will help answer one of the pressing questions of our time. How will the rise of China affect the rest of the world? In other words, the future of the Chinese political system could define how China behaves as an emerging global power, how it interacts with its neighbors in Asia, and with that nation watching it so closely on the other side of the globe, the United States. This book is an attempt to describe the battle for China's future through the eyes of a handful of men and women. I begin in Part 1 with the efforts of individuals to unearth and preserve the nation's tragic recent history. The party's ability to rewrite the past is critical to its grip on the present and the future, and it has tried to maintain a sanitized account of events that serves to justify its rule. But from the violent beginnings of Chinese communism to the Tiananmen Square massacre, society is beginning to recover the truth. Part 2 explores how the party evolved after Mao's death and adapted to survive. The totalitarian socialist state that Mao built is no more. In its place is a more cynical, stable, and nimble bureaucracy, one that values self-preservation above all else, and relies on an often corrupt and predatory form of capitalism to survive. This section tells the stories of miners and factory workers left behind, and the apparatchiks and tycoons who thrived. I conclude in Part 3 with 4 ordinary people who tried to push the limits of what is permissible in China, just as a new party leadership raised hopes of democratic progress. Thrust into the national spotlight, they are forced to make difficult decisions about when to fight and when to back down, and to weigh the consequences of their choices for their families and their nation. Having tasted freedom, having learned something about the rule of law, having seen on television and in the movies and on the internet how other societies elect their own leaders, the Chinese people are pushing every day for a more responsive and just political system. The party has struggled to adapt and sometimes retreated in the face of such popular pressure, but it has not yet surrendered, not even close. Its leaders, and its millions of functionaries and beneficiaries, continue to cling to power, marshaling their considerable resources in a determined and often obsessive effort to maintain control over an increasingly vibrant society. Many people who care about China tell themselves that democratization is inevitable, that the people will eventually prevail, and the one-party state will fail. I certainly hope so. But I have